And I think we're live. Welcome everyone once again to the Against the Stream podcast. First of all, apologies for the slight delay in us getting started. We have some
last minute technical
problem, which means that we're actually now recording this episode on my laptop. And I hope you can hear us well and that you're ready to go. We have a lot of very, very interesting material for you there. So I think we should just get to it. Oh, again, of course, this is everything is a bit chaotic today. My name is Hamid Alizadeh. I'm here with Jorge Martin. We are from the International Secretariat of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And this is, of course, the Against the Stream podcast where we analyze current world events on a weekly basis from a communist perspective. And with those words, I think we can jump straight into it. Jorge, this week we're going to start. I think there's some momentum in this story, so to say. The election of Donald Trump. There's lots of things that have been happening, and there's lots of aspects of this phenomenon that we haven't yet analyzed. The article that I brought today that we can use as kind of a hook to discuss this is an opinion piece written in New York Times, actually on the 6th of November, by a person called Daniel McCarthy, who is a conservative. He's the editor of a magazine called The Modern Age, a conservative review. I think he also writes for lots of major conservative other magazines and so on. So clearly he's whatever he is, he's not a communist. However, sometimes the most intelligent bourgeois it's been seen to happen do come to quite advanced conclusions that come close to the same conclusions as Marxists, although from an opposite class point of view. And I think this article is a very, very good example of that, because as opposed to most of the other commentaries that I have read, at least, which often falls into some sort of moralism or just very, very superficial way of treating with things, I think this article is well worth a full read. Because it gets it right, the analysis right on many, many, many points. The article is called "This is Why Trump Won." It was published on the 6th of November in the New York Times. I could read the whole article, but I'm just going to start with these two paragraphs, Jorge. It says, this was no ordinary contest between two candidates from rival parties. The real choice before voters was between Mr. Trump and everyone else. Not only the Democratic nominee Kamala Harris and her party, but also Republicans, Liz Cheney, top military officers like General Mark Milley and General John Kelly, who's also a former chief of staff of Donald Trump, outspoken members of the intelligence community, and Nobel Prize-winning economists. Framed this way, the presidential contest became an example of what's known in economics as creative destruction. His opponents certainly fear that Mr. Trump will destroy American democracy itself. Now, I think this is quite an interesting statement, because obviously Trump himself is a billionaire. He's from the American elite and the American capitalist class. He used to be at least a part of the establishment. He was a famous TV personality, and he was generally a celebrity. However, I think what we saw in these elections, more than even so than the previous ones perhaps, was that he, because of his way of going about things, because he's a maverick, because he doesn't play by the rules, he has positioned himself, and also for political and opportunist reasons, he's positioned himself against the whole of the establishment, and that is a big part of his election victory. What do you think?
Yeah, he positioned himself as the anti-establishment candidate, and this is the way he was seen by most people. So in fact, if you look at the actual vote, the final vote's not been counted yet. I mean, this is the most advanced capitalist country on earth, and a week later they still don't have the full votes. But anyway, It's the Democrats have lost millions of votes. I don't know, at the present count
almost 9
is
million.
8.5 million votes. Trump has not increased his vote by very much. He has increased by, I think, 1 million, or maybe it'll be 2 million by the end of it, or perhaps a bit more. But basically, the establishment party, i.e. the Democrats, have completely collapsed. And you say, oh, there's different interpretations. But I read the other day, I listened the other day, Aaron Bastani from Novara Media. He was interviewing some academic expert. Yeah. And their take was, young men have moved to the right. It's a complete misunderstanding of what this election was about. For instance, we have talked about this. In a number of states, I think it's about 6 or 8 different states, where there were initiatives to enshrine abortion rights in the state law, they all won.
They all got the majority.
They all got the majority.
Yeah.
In Florida, they got the majority, but they didn't win because they needed 60%. But they all won by a big margin, all of them in states where Trump won the election, or big majority of them in states where Trump won the election. For instance, in Montana, abortion got 54%, 20 points more than Kamala Harris. Yeah. In Nebraska, 52% for abortion, 8 points more than Kamala Harris. In New York, 63% for abortion initiative. That's 6.8 more than the percentage than Kamala, and so on and so on. And some of this, or Arizona, where Trump won the election by a big majority, 63% for abortion, 49% for Kamala.
In fact, according to AP, 38% of Trump voters were for expanding abortion rights.
Yeah, but what this basically means is that obviously there's a core of abortion, there's a core of Trump voters who are against abortion rights, but a lot of people voted for Trump despite this, regardless of his positions on whether he's racist and misogynist and all of that, they still voted for him. So therefore it cannot be explained on the basis of this other question. It has to be explained on the basis of what we've been saying for 2 weeks. On the basis of the economy. He was seen as the candidate that will solve the economy. And the economy, personal economic position of families in the US has gone down. It's perceived to be worse. It's perceived to be worse because it is worse for what is it, about 60 or 70% of the people.
Huge part of it. Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to go a bit deeper into that in a bit. But I think also this question of people seeing this as a chance to kick the establishment. Yeah. I think that is a very key thing. And in fact, the following paragraph that I didn't read out because I can't read the whole article, although I do. I do want to. Is he says, to his supporters, however, so this is not about what Trump thinks or what he stands for. This is what the vote meant to his supporters. To his supporters, however, a vote for Mr. Trump meant a vote to evict a failed leadership class from power and recreate the nation's institutions under a new set of standards that would better serve American citizens. Now, obviously some people see this from a reactionary point of view. Some people have far right and so on. But I think from a point of view of a lot of people, this is what they were looking for, a purge, or to give a kick to the establishment, essentially. And I think that's a very, very important part of it. Now, in a different way than maybe his followers and many people imagine it, there has been a struggle brewing. I think that's one thing that's become clear as well, is that, yes, the whole establishment positioned themselves against Trump. And it doesn't seem like Trump is going to back down. We've seen this week a whole series of appointments of candidates. There's Pete Hegseth, that no one knew about. No one knew who he was until yesterday. A Fox News presenter with clear far-right sympathies. But Fox News presenter, nevertheless, was appointed the head of Pentagon, the Ministry of Defense, essentially, Secretary of Defense. You have, and it's been mentioned that they're going to set up a warrior council, they call it, or some sort of a council or a committee, to root out, to purge the Pentagon from officers and generals who they say, who are not efficient and who don't do the, but in reality, who will mobilize against Trump, because he realizes that the state apparatus is not going to just sit and accept this. The establishment and all what he calls the deep state essentially are going to go for it. There's also the appointment of Elon Musk, and what's his name? His
I don't know, he's a private entrepreneur.
Another millionaire.
Businessman.
Business. Who is taking up the Department of Government Efficiency, which is tasked with...
New department.
Yeah, which is the new department, which is tasked with purging against firing loads of people.
Yes.
And you just see
Dodge.
Dodge.
It sounds a bit like the Ministry of Silly Walks
Exactly.
from a Monty Python sketch.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also Doge is a bit
Is
a
the
crypto.
name of the Bitcoin. Yes.
Anyway, but what you see in the outline here is an internal struggle within the U.S. state apparatus between Donald Trump and the rest of the establishment.
In fact, I was listening to a right-wing commentator from the United States, the Trump supporter, the other day, and he was saying precisely this. He was saying, look, the first time round when Trump was elected, he came in and he didn't know how the machine works, he didn't know how the state apparatus works, and he found that many of his initiatives or things he wanted to do were blocked by different arms of the state, by checks and balances. And it's quite interesting because it gives you an idea of how the capitalist state works,
yes,
right?
Precisely.
Let's imagine for a second that instead of Donald Trump, you elect a radical left-wing president. He will find himself trapped by the web of checks, balances, officers, rules and regulations of the capitalist state. And I think that Trump this time wants to make sure that that is not the case. Whether he will manage or not is a different matter, but these appointments point in that direction. He wants someone who's going to purge the army, wants someone who's going to purge the state in terms of the officers at the different levels of the administration, and he wants to give himself as many powers as possible. There's even talk about him being able to nominate people when Senate is in recess and things like this. This is basically a Bonapartist tendency, very clear Bonapartist tendency, but also it gives you an insight on how the capitalist state works. You can elect whoever you want, but at the end of the day, there's a whole number of high officials and so on that respond to the basic interest of the ruling class.
They're never elected by anyone.
Never elected by anyone.
99.99% of the
right.
state is never elected by anyone.
And on top of this, there's a whole layer of lobbyists and companies, and there's a big transfer between one and the other.
Yes.
There's people who work in the administration, then they work as lobbyists, or the other way around.
Yeah.
They become contractors, or they form part of quasi-governmental bodies and all of that. That is
And
how the capitalist state works. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, actually, going on from this, I would say that the next quote that I picked from this article, it says, "Those who see in Mr. Trump a profound rejection of Washington's present conventions are correct. He's not playing by the rules. That's one of the reasons why they hate him.
They don't like it.
But here's the really interesting thing. He says, he is like an atheist defying the teachings of a church. The challenge he presents lies not so much in what he does, but in the fact that he calls into question the beliefs on which authority rests." That's the old way of church speech. "Mr. Trump has shown that the nation's political orthodoxies are bankrupt, and the leaders in all of our institutions, private as well as public, who stake their claim to authority on their fealty to such orthodoxies are now vulnerable. This may be exactly what voters want." And it continues, but I think this is what I wanted to highlight is precisely what you're talking about, is that yes, it's true that Donald Trump is not representative of the working class. I mean, and we can go into that at a different time, but he certainly has some Bonapartist tendencies. But what the ruling class and the dominant wing of it and the establishment, the Washington establishment, really cannot forgive him. It's not so much that he's a misogynist, or that he's a racist, or that he wants to throw.
They all are.
They all are. They all are. They just don't show it. They all are. As if Kamala Harris is better for women You know, I wonder what the women of Gaza would say to Kamala Harris, a female black president being
supporting the genocide in Gaza.
Supporting the
it makes a big difference.
Yeah. And they don't care so much. But what they cannot forgive him is that one, he exposes the whole system. He exposes all of these. He shows that no, the state is not a neutral body. This is what all this. Oh, he's messing with the American democracy is being. It's not. Yes, American democracy. What it really is being exposed to everyone, as in being a dictatorship of capital, essentially, and a small group organized around it, and also the media. You know, all of the different institutions, the companies and everything that's supposed to be working in a, you know, efficient and fair manner within capitalist democracy is being exposed. And finally, more importantly than anything maybe, he has put the idea of the working class on the agenda. Mm-hmm. He's been talking about the working class, he's been talking about the struggles of the working class, he's been talking about the needs of the working class, the pain of the working class. Of course, he's then taken this and used it in a very demagogic way to prop up his own support and for his own opportunistic reasons. But that cat is out of the sack. You can't just undo that. Everyone knows this now. Everyone knows, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you can see with your own eyes what's going on out there. And that will have profound implications for the future.
I will add to this that it's not so much that Trump has done this, right? Trump is a cause, yes, but it's also a symptom. Many of these institutions were already discredited by the crisis of American capitalism, the decay of American capitalism, and Trump has given expression to that. But by doing that, is aggravating that crisis, is making it deeper. I mean, some people might think that this is a bit far-fetched, but I think there are elements of Trump and the role he plays that are similar to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and the role he played. Hugo Chavez was a left-winger, right? He was a revolutionary. And he did really want to represent the interests of the working class, unlike Trump. But he also broke with convention. He will appear in a public speech in sports gear and talk the language of the people, right? And the ruling class really hated him for that, because that kind of breaks the sanctity of this idea of the neutrality of the state and the institutions, that they're not partisan, they don't serve particular interest, but serves the interest of everyone, which is a lie at all times. But in times like this lie is exposed to millions, and that is what's dangerous for the ruling class.
And the point is that, one, Donald Trump has his own ambitions and ego, which is probably a big driving force behind all of this. But the further he goes, the more he stands to lose, and the more the dominant wing of the ruling class wants to get him out of the way, which means that he needs to go further. He can't really, this is a process that's out of his thing. And also, I would say, I mean, you mentioned Hugo Chavez, and this is something I actually wanted to raise in a future program, but there is an element, as you said, there is an element of Bonapartism here. Now, we talk about, Bonapartism is a specific phenomenon which arises, and it's a very elastic term, you can say this, you can have many different versions of it. But it happens at a time where the class struggle is at a deadlock in one way or another, and where you can have certain individuals rising above those classes by leaning on different. And what we see, if we look at it from a bit further angle, a bit further away, we see that, what have you had? You had, since 2008, massive crises, political instability, intensification of the class struggle, shock after shock with the economic crisis and the COVID crisis, the whole establishment being exposed.
The Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter. Enormous anger amongst the working class and the youth, dissatisfaction with the whole system. Everything has been delegitimized in the eyes of millions and millions of people. But there's been no one to channel this. Bernie Sanders, we've explained this before, didn't step up to the task. He betrayed the movement in essence. So you have this enormously powerful working class, which because of its lack of leadership is unable to take power, is unable to move forward. And at the same time, you have a ruling class which is not strong enough to crush the working class movement. It's not strong enough to subjugate it as such. The workers are too powerful, for now at least. And therefore you can have a figure like Trump come up and lean on at least a part of the working class, demagogically, to strike blows against another wing of the ruling class. We've seen this many times in history, but one of the things that one of the examples that reminds me of is Erdogan in Turkey. He came to power in early 2000s when the establishment, all of the other political parties in Turkey were enormously discredited, hated by everyone. The only party that had not been tested was the AKP. And so they appeared like the clean hands, and they talked about democracy, they talked about cleansing the whole system. And he
also leaned on the working class.
Yes, he did, and he came to in a way. It was in a distorted way. He leaned on a revolutionary wave, because revolution was just under the surface, but it wasn't getting an expression. The left was all embroiled in the scandals of the right wingers and the establishment, and he came to, but then obviously once he was in power, again you saw the same thing, an internal struggle that lasted at least 15 years inside of Turkey, inside the Turkish state. But then, however it went, that's not really relevant to here. But I think with Trumpism, what we have is a mild form of parliamentary Bonapartism, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, he acts in that way.
Yeah.
He is now bringing into his administration a whole series of people who are outsiders, who are not trained politicians or career politicians, and he wants to use them as a battering ram against what he sees as the administration and the state. And this is very dangerous from the point of view of the ruling class, and it's setting the stage for a big clash.
Yeah. That leads us to the next point I wanted to raise, is that yes, he has gathered around him a very, very unlike coalition, you can say. On the one hand, you have the evangelical, ultra-reactionary Christian mob. Then you have some lumpen elements, the patriotic elements. Then you have a series of petty bourgeois, middle-class people who are under extreme pressure, the enraged petty bourgeoisie, as Trotsky called them. And then you have these billionaires like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and other billionaires who are now, and hedge fund managers who are vying to be in his administration. And then next to these, you have a significant chunk of the American working class. And the interests of all of these are quite different. And this is something that this article actually is one of the few ones that actually notices that. He says, if the disruption that Mr. Trump represents seems unusually drastic, that's a sign that American politics has been insufficiently competitive for too long. Before Mr. Trump came along, power was in the hands of a political cartel, which, like the market cartels that Adam Smith had warned about, involved institutions that should have been in robust competition, but were instead cooperating to exclude rival products or ideas. The cartel's overpriced, shoddy goods failed to satisfy the public's demand.
The Democrats and the Republicans,
the establishment, the traditional parties, they couldn't satisfy people's demands. Perhaps Mr. Trump and the movement he brings to Washington will not meet them either, i.e. the demands of the people. It's worth remembering that most new companies that break up established market relationships do not last long. They only discover an opportunity that someone else later makes the most of. And then he comes to the crucial part, which our US companies quoted. That's how I actually found this article. It says, if Mr. Trump and his coalition fail to create something better than what they have replaced, they will suffer the same fate they inflicted on the fallen Bush, Clinton, and Cheney dynasties. A new force for creative destruction will emerge, possibly on the American left.
No, it's very interesting, actually. This is exactly the same point that Alan makes at the end of his article.
Yes.
What's the title of Alan's article? A kick in the Trump's victory, a kick in the teeth for the establishment.
Yes.
And at the end he says, okay, Trump has won now, by trying to articulate or demagogically latching on the class anger that exists in US society, but he will be unable to fulfill his promises to the American working class. And therefore that will at some point, not necessarily immediately, but at some point that will prepare a shift of the pendulum to the left. And that's the same point that this article is making.
And you brought a few quotes. I thought maybe you could read this.
That's interesting because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she in her Instagram account, she asked people, she said, there are people who support both Trump and me or voted Trump and Democrat.
Maybe
right?
you should explain who Alessandra.
Oh, she's a member of the House. She's a congresswoman who is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. She's seen as a left winger by some people who support her. So this is her supporters. She's asking her followers, why did some of you vote for me and Trump, or voted for Trump and other Democrats? And she was curious to know. She says, I'm genuinely interested in knowing, right? This is not a trick question. Yeah. And people are answering very interesting questions. It says, one says, it's real simple. Trump and you care for the working class. Yeah. Another one, I voted Trump, but I like you and Bernie, Bernie Sanders. Yeah. I don't trust either party establishment politicians. Yeah. Then it says, because I feel that you both, Trump and AOC, are outsiders compared to the rest of DC and less establishment. And there's more. Yeah. There's another one who says, I voted for Trump and for you. This seems apparently paradoxical. Someone who voted for Trump, who's a right-wing demagogue, and at the same time voted for AOC, who is on the so-called left of the Democratic Party. And he says, this person says, I voted for Trump and for you, not for genocide Harris. Yeah. The Democrats need Bernie. Yeah. And then another one, he says, because Trump speaks of war as something bad. The Democrats have become the party that supports war. Yeah. And there's a whole number of other like that. And I think that this also brings another question that some people say, no, foreign policy has not played a role in American, in this election. And on the face of it, that's true. Very few people have said that they have voted because of foreign, but this becomes enmeshed in other things. Trump has said, why are we spending money, billions in Ukraine? Was it 61 billion? I don't know how much in total. Why are we spending money in Ukraine when the American working class is suffering? Yeah. And so this can be seen as a point of foreign policy or a point of home policy. Or, for instance, there's quite a lot of people who have refused, taken a conscious decision not to vote for the Democrats because of the war in Gaza, because they're warmongers. Yeah. And they think, I mean, on the face of it, Trump has said, I'm going to put an end to all these wars.
And a lot of US soldiers are opposed to all this forever wars.
Veterans.
It's a huge thing, yeah. Exactly. And so the point is, just to round up this part of the discussion, I think that's very interesting, because what we have here is not just Donald Trump winning, but a significant part of the US working class believe that they put Donald Trump in power. They've seen their interests raised. They've been put on the agenda. The question of prices, of jobs, of inequality, that's been put on the agenda, and they did it. And therefore, sooner or later, Donald Trump will also be tested. Mm-hmm. They're going to say, where's the proof? Where's the proof of the pudding? There might be a period where, because of the opposition against him, people will give him some grace. But in the end, he's got to choose. Is he going to satisfy the needs of Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, or the working class of America?
Well, the point is that the policies he's proposing, protectionist tariffs and so on, will not solve the problems of the U.S. working class, because it's the capitalist economy that is in crisis, and that will come back to bite him. And therefore,
the people who put him in power could take him down again, and a new force on the American left could be created. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next article. If you see me fiddling around, it's because normally my notes are in this computer, and now I'm trying to find them on my mobile phone. But actually, this was an article that you brought to our attention just before we went live. This is in The Economist from last week, I believe.
Yeah, from the 7th of November, I think.
And it's called Let's see what it's called.
The headline is completely irrelevant because it's not what the article actually says.
Well, it says why. It's just reading out the names so comrades, our listeners know about them. But it's called "Why Volodymyr Zelensky May Welcome Donald Trump's Victory," and there's a lot of material in this. But the main bit that we want to focus on is the following. It says, "The change in Washington, i.e., Trump's election, comes at a difficult time for Ukraine's armed forces. After a year facing down the Russian offensive conducted at an astonishing cost to Russia with upwards of 57,000 Russians dead this year alone, Ukraine has suffered its worst month of territorial losses since 2022, some 620 square kilometers, though this is only 1% of the country's pre-war area. In reality, I think it's more than 1,200 square kilometers now. I don't know why they're quoting this figure. Russia is moving on multiple points and accelerating its advance. It appears to be a matter of time before Ukraine is forced to withdraw from strategic high grounds around Kharkov in Donetsk province, leading to a possibility of a psychologically damaging entry into neighboring Dnipro province by the end of the year. The worry now is less what is happening at the front lines than what it reveals about the stresses behind them."
That's the interesting part.
Yeah. Amid a breakdown of trust between society, the army, and the political leadership, Ukraine is struggling to replace battlefield losses with conscription barely hitting 2/3 of its target. Russia, meanwhile, is replacing its losses by recruitment with lucrative contracts without needing to revert to mass mobilization. A senior Ukrainian military commander admits that there has been a collapse in morale in some of the worst sections of the front. A source in the general staff suggests that nearly a fifth of soldiers have gone AWOL from their positions.
That's incredible.
That is a very, very bleak situation.
It reveals really the situation that exists in Ukrainian society. This war's been going on for many months now. There doesn't seem to be an end to it, and not only this, but now the Ukrainians are on the losing side. The West is coming to an end of its ability and willingness to support this war against Russia any further, and this is creating demoralization. It's not just a question of people going absence without leave. 20%. That's a huge number, which we commented on before.
Yes.
But it's also the question of people resisting the draft, these recruitment officers. There's lots of stories of basically kidnapping people off the streets, and people don't want to go. And it says here, I think it says 85% or 2/3 of the recruitment targets. But in another article from The Economist this week, I've read that in some of the figures say that they're only achieving 50% of the recruitment targets. The soldiers that are in the front, they haven't had any rotation. Some of them have been there from the very beginning. In the article this week in The Economist, it said, from yesterday, it said that many in Ukraine feel that recruitment is a death sentence. They won't come back, and they obviously don't want to go.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, when you talk about morale, that's the thing, because a war, especially most wars are wars of attrition. It's only when there's a there are two other scenarios. One is an immediate surprise attack, and a political collapse, and then the war is over. And then when you have overwhelming difference between forces, you have maneuver warfare, which is when they cut across large scale of land. But what you have in Ukraine, what we've explained for a long time, is a war of attrition, and which, from the point of view, in the papers, they always talk about it like, oh, they're not gaining much, and they're not. But in reality, it's not about gaining much. I'll read a quote. Actually, I'll do it now because I think it's quite interesting. We published an article in April 2022 by Alan Woods, which deals with a lot of particular stuff, which is not so relevant at this stage anymore. However, there is a quote which I think hones in on the key question. He says, at this point, let us call as a key witness to the prosecution none other than Karl von Clausewitz, the man who was arguably the greatest military strategist of all time. As a disciple of Hegel, old Clausewitz understood the dialectic of war very well. He postulated that armies and not cities are nations' center of gravity, and he described the aims of war very succinctly. In the first volume of his masterpiece, On War, on the question of occupying territory and cities, he has this to say. He says, "The aim of war should be the defeat of the enemy. But what constitutes defeat? The conquest of his whole territory is not always necessary, and total occupation of his territory may not be enough." Then he continues, end quote. Clausewitz explains that the aim of war is not the conquest of territory and cities, but the destruction of the enemy forces. Here is what he writes. "Fighting is the central military act. Engagement means fighting. The object of fighting is the destruction or defeat of the enemy. What do we mean by the defeat of the enemy? Simply the destruction of his forces, whether by death, injury, or any other means, either completely or enough to make him stop fighting. The complete or partial destruction of the enemy must be regarded as the sole object of all engagements. Direct annihilation of the enemy's forces must always be the dominant consideration." I think that pretty much sums up the past 2 years of fighting in Ukraine, in the sense that from a Russian point of view, it's not been a question, besides the first period of the war, where actually a lot of mistakes were made. And the Russians suffered some big setbacks from that. But very quickly they retooled and they started this steady grind and the development of the industrial base, the development of a recruitment process, and then you had obviously the productive capacity of Russia, the population of Russia, which is 4 or 5 times as big as Ukraine's, against Ukraine, and a West which has a lower productive capacity, is shown, of weapons. Now they say, oh, we should have sent them more weapons and more arms, but they don't produce more things. They're actually running out of a lot of missiles and so on and so forth. And that can go on for a certain amount of time, and you can see it can seem like nothing is really happening. But what's happening is that the army is being ground down, and that's what you see today. We have an article from New York Times. Do you want to comment on this, or should I continue to that article?
No, I just remembered something that is an interesting point. When you say that the West is producing less in terms of weaponry, shells, and so on, I saw a discussion that took place a few months ago. Now everything's now been superseded by the victory of Trump and his change of policy and all that. But a few months ago there was a discussion, and some arms manufacturers were telling the U.S. government, says, okay, if you give us a contract, but not a contract for 1 year, but a contract for 10, 15, 20 years, then we will invest in creating new productive capacity, and we will work whatever 24/7. But unless we have the security that if we invest, this is for the long term, then we will not invest. Yeah. And in Russia, this doesn't happen because it's a nationalized yes. arms industry. And Putin, the government says, okay, you're going to produce this, you're going to invest here. Yeah. And so this is a point that Ted used to make about the Second World War, that when it comes to war, the government's requisition industry, and they don't leave it to the market to produce. They actually, planning is introduced even on capitalist basis. So that just proves superiority of planning over the market, the free forces of the capitalist market. Yeah. And in this particular case, this is delaying the arms, the weapons production in the West.
Exactly. And that's the thing, because in the end, in a head-to-head war, barring a political collapse or a sudden shock that somehow disorganizes the enemy, in the end, it's the industrial base and the size of the population that are the decisive factors. And the fact is that U.S. imperialism, Western imperialism, has been outproduced, and its limitations and its internal contradictions has been shown to be true. I think we should get back to this at the end of this.
And obviously the other factor is that the Western imperialism calculated or counted on sanctions disorganizing the Russian economy, which has not happened. It's completely failed. In fact, the Russian economy has overcome sanctions, is trading with a whole number of countries in different ways, and is not been fundamentally affected by it.
And once that happened...
And this actually is something that Alan was pointing out in this article from was it April 22?
Yes. And once that happened, then it was over. Then the defeat was at hand. It's just a matter of time. And then and here you have then the stupidity or the arrogance or the, I don't know how you want to, ignorance of the West and Zelensky and all these guys. They keep pushing and keep pushing, keep throwing arms at the cynicism, you can say, of Western imperialism, of keep throwing arms at Ukraine. Why? To maybe get a slightly better position, win a slightly better negotiation position. In reality, they've lost everything now. That's the matter. That's the fact of the matter. But it was clear from then on. These insane defending every town, but whatever the cost, just throwing lots and lots. And from a Russian point of view, you can say, well, this fits in our plans because an offense is always costlier than a defense. So if the Ukrainians are helping the Russians by attacking and counterattacking, this is just increasing the level of attrition until you get to a certain point where morale starts breaking. And that's the beginning of the end. That's where you see exponential part. And I'll just read a little bit of...
And also, can I just say, the fact that the Russians have so many people over such a stretched front line means that they can be probing the Ukrainian defenses at different points. So the Ukrainians concentrate their defense on one area of the front. The Russians maybe try somewhere else. Now there's talk that they're going to launch an offensive in the south towards Zaporizhzhia, or I don't know. I read that some Russian soldiers entered Kupiansk in the north, in the Kharkov
probably just
front,
reconnaissance
or whatever. But they keep trying. It's not just that there is one area of the front where they concentrated. So and because of the superiority in terms of particularly of men, in this case manpower and all the accompanying weaponry, then they have an advantage.
Yes, and let me just read out just a little bit of frontline reports from Financial Times. It says, manpower, especially infantry, remains Ukraine's biggest challenge, according to commanders and analysts. The average age is already above 40 in various brigades, and there doesn't seem to be enough reinforcements arriving on the front line. Then it continues a bit further down. Ukraine is planning to draft an additional 160,000 troops between November and February, which the National Security and Defense Council believes will replenish military units to only about 85% of what's needed. So they can't even replenish them 100%. And then someone else says the target will be military experts and one senior Kiev official expressed skepticism that the target will be reached, saying it was more realistic to expect up to 100,000 to be drafted. In reality, it's probably below that. That would fill about half of the manpower gap, they said, which would still be an improvement, as some units are currently staffed to about a third of what is needed. Then it continues. Kiev is talking about the problem they have with mobilization. It says a lot of guys now see mobilization as a death sentence. That's what it is, because you don't get rotated out. First of all, this huge amount of people are dying. The Russians have massive superiority in artillery and so on, and you don't get rotated out. You don't leave the army, basically. Yes. And then it goes further on, and it talks about how they're having to use Air Force, pilots. They have to, one commander says, I had to send my cooks to the front to man the things. Yeah. They have engineers, they have maintenance staff, medical teams. All of these are being sent, i.e. they're running on gas, essentially, running on fumes, just trying to keep this thing going. But the fact is that they've already lost. And so, go ahead.
Can I just say for clarification, I mean, the situation is one where there was a US senator early on in the war, and he said, this war is very good for us because we no American soldiers are dying, and it's very cheap for us. We just provide some money, and someone else is fighting for us. This is the real cynicism, because it's not that we are gloating about the situation of Ukraine, but the situation of Ukraine is being paid by whom? By Ukrainian working people who've been sent as cannon fodder to the front line to die for war. For what? Not for Ukrainian sovereignty. I mean, if you see Zelensky's so-called victory plan, basicly he's saying
selling off Ukraine.
Yeah, he's saying, look, there's lots of natural resources here. It's all yours if you come in. So what kind of self-determination or sovereignty is that? So they're all dying for what? For the interest of U.S. imperialism, to weaken a rival, in this case, Russia. This is the only thing.
And also he proposed that the Ukrainian army become the mercenary army of NATO. That they have
sent somewhere.
That they can mobilize 900,000 Ukrainians to man the whole of the Eastern European border, which is just completely disgusting. Yes, that is now that with Donald Trump coming into power, that is the situation that he's facing on the ground. There's been a lot of talk about the negotiation position of Trump, and maybe he should ask for Ukraine to be admitted to NATO in 20 years' time, and they should give some. But the fact of the matter is, the Russians have won.
This would have been okay, perhaps,
2 years ago.
In the spring of 22, when they had the negotiations in Turkey.
In fact, as you say, another element of this cynicism is that it was the West that disrupted the peace agreement that they had deliberately, because for the reasons that you say, for the cynical reasons that you say. Now, I just also want to, again, just to come back to one thing which I thought was quite interesting, which I was thinking about before the show, is that what we see here, we talked about it before, the crisis of U.S. imperialism, the limitations of U.S. imperialism having been reached, and a relative decline that U.S. imperialism has achieved throughout the world, i.e., yes, U.S. imperialism, the U.S. is still by far the biggest, the most advanced economy on the planet. It has culturally, diplomatically, militarily, there's no superiority above anyone else, and no one comes close to that power. However, in relation, as opposed to, let's say, the immediate post-war period, in relative terms to the rest of the world, it is different. Or even after the fall of the Soviet Union, where Russia was weak, China was weak, India was weak and under the total control of, or very close, under enormous influence of the US. Now, all of these powers and others, even Brazil and other powers, have built up a certain power, certain economic and even military power base. Russia has rebuilt its industries. The Soviet industry was a powerful industrial base. It's clear from the war, at least, that the industrial base has to a large extent been rebuilt, which means that the old order of things, with the US as the sole superpower deciding everything in every corner of the planet, in every country of the planet, that doesn't work anymore. And the Ukraine war is a glaring example of that. And here you see precisely the Russian economy having regained its strength, outpacing European and Western economy on a whole series of things. And also the Russian army. And what's come out of this, they've kind of accelerated the process that was already taking place, that Russia has now emerged as a powerful world power, maybe not at the same level of the US, but powerful force, with a massive army that's been honed and trained and strengthened, and which Russia undoubtedly will use now for its own purposes.
Yeah, in fact, if you think about it, the Russian invasion of Ukraine took place about 9 months after, or between 6 and 9 months after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan was a humiliating retreat, which revealed partially the relative weakening of the power of U.S. imperialism. But now the defeat of U.S. imperialism in Ukraine will be a much bigger in scale phenomena, in event, in world politics and world relations, And as you say, Russia will have emerged from this as with a big army, but not only a big army, one army that has been fighting, battle hardened in the most modern type of warfare that there is today. The US will not have
against
that,
an almost
experience.
NATO army.
Yes,
that's what the Ukrainian army was.
And that will mean a big realignment in world politics, world relations.
Yes, and we'll have to see how that develops. Okay, Jorge, let's move on. Then we'll get back to this topic,
Surely,
I'm sure. Let's move on to the last point on the agenda, which is Spain. We talked about this now for 2 weeks. This is the third. There's been massive protests and rising anger in Valencia. We wrote an article called "Massive Protests Against Crimes of the Valencian Generalitat" for a general strike to bring down Masson. It was published on Marxists.com on the 12th of November and written by the Spanish section of the Revolutionary Communist International, our Spanish section. And
yes, basically on Saturday, the 9th of November, there was a big demonstration in Valencia. This was a week or 10 days after the massive floods which have left. I don't know exactly what's the latest in the count of people who died, but it's more than 220, something like that. And obviously this is on the one side a natural disaster, but it's quite clear. There's a lot of evidence that the regional government completely bungled the emergency warning, that the local businessmen, local capitalists, the local bosses prevented people from leaving work early, or they forced them to go to work, putting many people at risk as a result, and that ultimately capitalism is responsible for climate change that makes these things more extreme.
Just one thing we didn't bring in before you continue, that Masson, who was the president of Valencia, the regional president, they found out that
this has been
that he was having dinner with a female journalist for 3 hours. And he didn't quit
in the middle of the escalation of the floods,
while the death figures were beginning to come out.
That's right, and this is now been coming out for the week, 10 days after the actual tragedy. And so the anger was building up, and this demonstration been called by rank-and-file organizations, left-wing organizations, neighborhood associations, and so on. And it wasn't very clear how many people were going to come, but in the end the demonstration was huge. You know, the police gave an official figure of 130,000, I think, or something like this. But the comrades who were present at the demonstration say that, I mean, at least there will have been more than 200,000, perhaps 250,000. There were people coming from all the main affected neighborhoods and working class towns in the south of Valencia, Alfasar, Paiporta, and all of these places. They were walking from there. There's no public transport still to this day. And they all arrived. There was a lot of anger. The organizers had asked for this to be a silent demonstration, a show of respect for those who died and lost their belongings and so on. But the people were so angry that there were a number of chants, very angry chants at the demonstration. Kill us, asesinos, kill us. Directed at whom? Directed at the regional government, directed at the bosses, directed also partially at the national government of the Socialist Party, which is, for a week, there was a to and fro about who was responsible, who had to intervene.
Instead of acting, they were trying to put the blame on
politicking and point scoring between the Madrid government and the Valencia government. People were very, very angry. There were incidents outside of the Generalitat, outside the local council building. And there's a lot of pressure for this guy to resign, the regional president, Mazón, who is particularly responsible for the whole thing. He had a really dreadful behavior. On the day, he said the storm was moving away. Then there was an emergency meeting, which he didn't attend because he was at this working lunch with this journalist that people don't really know what it was about. He lied about this lunch at the beginning. Then it was revealed. Then when the emergency meeting that was taking place in the afternoon finally decided to send a warning to all mobile phones to people to be careful, to stay at home, or to move to higher ground, Then the decision was delayed, but for 45 minutes because the regional government representative at this meeting didn't understand the meaning of this system. I mean, the whole thing is a complete disaster. But it's not just a complete disaster, it's a complete disaster that happened because of the callousness of putting the bosses' profits before the prevention of the loss of life. So this has been revealed very clearly, and there was a big explosion of anger. But also, as the comrades say in the article, anger had already been building up in Spanish society before that, and people are even angrier because of lots of other things that have been happening around and before this question.
Yeah, one thing that I found interesting was this slogan, was it only the people save the people?
Sol popolo, solo
popolo. Which also, I mean, I don't know if that's what it refers to, you would know that better than me. But first of all, there's a mass anger against Masson, who was elected when? Recently.
Yeah, 2023.
So this is a region which voted conservative, essentially. That's very, very interesting. Yes. And then you have this mass anger against Masson, who call him a killer, who call him to resign.
To resign, sorry, in the demonstration they were shouting, El President a Picassent, the president should go to Picassent, which is one of the main jails in. It's not just they want him to resign, they want him to be.
And then what you have is that this enormous, how do you say, movement of solidarity.
Yes, from below.
Thousands and thousands of people, ordinary working class people, ordinary people from all of the region areas, from the cities and villages themselves, setting up councils and committees, and that you would know that better. But also against the authorities, because they were, I mean, all of this, we know that, you told this I think last time or the last time before this, that the firefighters who volunteered would be turned away. Then finally they said, okay, but if volunteers can come, 15,000 people showed up and they didn't have enough buses, they didn't know what to do with it. So against all odds, ordinary people organized to manage this huge natural disaster, which is the only reason why.
Can I say that? Also, this tends to happen, and any time there is a natural disaster like this, where the failings of the state apparatus are revealed, the people step up, and this shows the best side of human nature. People say, "Oh, human nature is not conducive to socialism or solidarity," but here you see precisely the opposite. And a similar thing happened in Mexico in 1985. There was a huge earthquake, and solidarity brigades were formed. The people participated in the clearing of the rubble and looking for survivors and all of that. And that left a legacy of popular mass kind of neighborhood-based organization for many years to come. And this shows really...
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me with reading it was, this is a region that's just voted conservative. So you would say, oh, these are right-wing people. Like people say about Trump supporters, in a way. Oh, these are just right-wing people. But Trotsky, I remember, he said one time, I never understood what he meant actually, but recently I've begun to understand it. He said in the history of the Russian Revolution, he says, everyone reacts differently if you tickle them. But everyone reacts the same if you put a red-hot iron on their hands. Right? And what he meant by that is that under immense pressures and in very, very, under the impact of huge events, the class nature of society reveals itself. And what you have here, on the one hand, is a ruling class, and class consciousness comes to the fore. The ruling class entirely abandoning the people and basically scrambling to defend their own prestige and privileges and prestige. We talked about the government of national unity, spending all of their energy defending themselves. And then you have ordinary working class people organizing without any help, without any organization, much better than the state in reality. And that's why often these kind of events lead up to, in one way or another, to revolutionary events, because they kind of bring up class consciousness, they realign it with the reality that people experience. I also, on the other hand, we have the question of national unity.
Yeah, I mean, what's been happening is that the ruling class in Spain is so worried about the anger against the ruling class as a whole, which was expressed in the monarchs visit. When the king and queen went to visit together with the politicians, went to visit some of the victims, they were pelted with mud, and people called them killers, and they didn't want them disrupting the relief effort. And this is unprecedented. So the ruling class is quite worried. So what we have now is, in reality, the Popular Party at the national level and the Socialist Party, which is in government, setting aside the political differences. In Valencia, the Socialist Party is now going to vote in favor of the regional budget proposed by the right wing. But and they refused. They said, we're not going to demand the resignation of Mazón, the regional president, because that will delay the relief effort. When in fact he is delaying the relief effort. So it's, you have a demonstration of 200,000 people demanding the resignation of this guy. The Socialist Party, which is supposed to be a left party, says, no, we're going to prop him up. Yeah. And the reason is not to make the relief effort more effective. No, the reason is because they want to protect the regime as a whole, which they see threatened. Not only by this thing, but the growing anger in Spain, which hasn't really subsided for the last 10, 15 years since the crisis of 2008.
In fact, El País, I sent you an article, I don't know if you read that, but in the beginning of that article, they compared this, what happened today, with 2004, where there was a terrorist bombing, where the president went out and lied about who was behind it
for political
gain, and ended up with a revolutionary backlash. And El País compares this with the same thing. Now, one thing that the comrades say in the article, which I think is quite important and interesting, is that this is, when we talked about the formation of class consciousness through this process, on the ground, you see the enormous, creative, creative power of the working class. This is the opposite of that. Here you have another opposing class, which is very conscious of its interests, and which knows that it must retard the process of class consciousness developing amongst the working class. I.e., it must, whatever it does, it must make sure that class lines are blurred as much as possible. They pull in the trade unions into this national unity. The trade unions and the bosses organize marches together. The Socialist Party and the Conservative Party unite and hold a hand.
Incidentally, this is another interesting point, that the trade unions, the bigger national trade unions, UGT and workers' commissions, they called for a 10-minute kind of protest outside workplaces on Friday before the demonstration. But they did that in unity with the bosses. When there's a lot of anger directed at the bosses for the role they played on the day of the disaster, they go for for class unity.
Exactly.
And the main trade unions were completely absent from the demonstration on Saturday. So in reality, the demonstration on Saturday is even more significant because such a big amount of people came out when they were being called by no official organization.
Maybe that's precisely why so many people came out.
Precisely.
And I would say and finally also there's a very, very energetic effort made to stop this movement from having success. I.e., for the working class not to feel its own power. For whatever happens, Mazón must not go. There must not be no immediate repercussions. They probably give some concessions after the fact, when they can say, we gave these concessions, the movement didn't get it. Why? Because they know Spain is a powder keg.
Yes, that's right.
And anything that raises class consciousness, which raises the confidence of the working class in itself, is to the detriment of the ruling class, and they want to stop it as much as they can.
Yeah. Someone is saying here in the comments, it says, workers' commissions and UGT are prawn-eating unions, which is quite funny, but it's true. I mean, the leaders of the trade unions are part of the regime, and they act to prevent class struggle. Yeah. And as you say, it's true. If Mazón is forced to resign as the direct result of the movement, then this will encourage the movement.
Yes.
People will realize that they are strong, that they can maybe now go for something else. And the situation in Spain is very volatile. People are very angry over issues of housing, the structure of the Spanish economy, which is geared towards tourism, and the impact that this has on people's access to housing, affordable housing, rents and stuff.
There's been decades of wage stagnation.
Yes, and so the situation is quite volatile, and they are worried that an accident like this, if you want to call it like that, can unleash class anger much wider and their response is class unity, or rather the unity of all the parties of the regime, the 1978 regime, to stop any movement in the direction of challenging their power and privileges.
Yeah, and perhaps just to round up this episode, if you want to take this back to what we started with Trump, what the capitalists cannot forgive Trump for is in this time where you see the same pressures in the US, mass anger, mass dissatisfaction. The establishment have lost enormous amounts of legitimacy.
And Trump, instead of helping them control it,
he's throwing
explosives into it.
He's throwing a match into the powder keg. And instead of having the national unity, the unity between Republicans and Democrats, which Gore Vidal always said. He said once. I haven't read it. I've said him quoted elsewhere, just to say. Gore Vidal once said, the U.S. there's only one party in America, the party of property, with a Republican
with two right wings.
With two right wings, the Democrats and the Republicans. Right up until Trump came up. Now you can maybe talk about two parties. Nevertheless, they still protect property. But that is the same situation existing everywhere. After decades of stagnation of living standards, increasing pressure on lives, increasing rate of exploitation at work, working class people have lost, the system has lost authority. They talk about Trump undermining the authority of the system, but it's already lost it.
Trump is an expression of this.
He's expressing it and he's accelerating it, but that is what we're seeing everywhere, and all of these accidental events will accelerate this process and bring it to the surface in a stronger and stronger way. So if you agree with me, Jorge, let's wrap it up. Okay. And thank you everyone for being here and being patient with us in this. I don't know if the sound was okay, if the video was okay, but thank you everyone for your supports and your suggestions. Please don't forget to send us articles, suggested themes. We do read all of the suggestions that you write in the comments to the videos afterwards, or you can send them to Marxists.com. And we will definitely take it into consideration and try to weave it into our program. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share the podcast as much as possible. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you again next week, same time and place. All the best. Bye.
Okay. That was good.